Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and I think it's about the third time that I've called this, but yep, I think the season's over. I think we're done. Yes, in fact, we are done. I'm still up in Queensland after a failed raid to Brisbane. I'm joined once again by my co-host, Grapeviney. Good evening, Grapeviney. Did the match look any better on the television?
No, unfortunately, Andy. It was every bit as bad as you probably saw in person. And I was just going through my notes that I made for tonight's show, and after taking out all the F and C words, all I'm left with actually is "G'day, Andy." So that's the entirety of my contribution for tonight's show. Actually, I'm hoping that having been at the ground, you can carry the rest of the podcast.
Well, that's all we have time for tonight. We'll join you in 2020, I think. I think that's what's going to take. I apologise in advance for a few things. If there's any negativity coming from us, I think we can be forgiven for that. Also, if the sound quality of this podcast isn't up to the standards that we're used to, it's because I am still away. I'm using pretty poor equipment to get you this podcast, so I hope our loyal listeners can forgive us. All right, I've got some notes as well. I haven't taken out any of the swear words, so here we go. I think the clearances, I think, is probably the best place to start. It didn't help that Maxy got injured, but I think even before that, we were just getting smashed in the middle. Not just the centre clearances, which I think we only got 3 centre clearances for the match. I'm having a look now. Oh no, 6 for the match. It was 20-6 centre clearances. That's just woeful. Look, when you look at where Brisbane were last year and where we were last year, and then have a look at what happened in this match, it's almost unthinkable that can happen, how far we've fallen. And I guess shows the development that they've the fast-track development of their team.
Yeah, the Lions are going well, and they are a good team, but you're right, we got our backsides handed to us in the middle. We got smashed in contested ball. I think we lost by 27 or 28. That was a number like that was unthinkable last year. I think we hardly lost contested ball last year. So, as you say, the difference between 2018 and this season is stark. Very stark.
I think we haven't lost contested clearances much this year either, and it just shows, what's sort of happened to us and where we're falling down in areas such as disposal and kicking efficiency, disposal efficiency, all of that. It's gone away. Our disposal, some of the look-away handballs, and Gus was probably the worst of it. A few times he just handballed over his head to nobody or to a Brisbane player. It's what's happened to some of these guys?
That's the $6 million question. Look, I think it's partly answered by something we're going to discuss later, and we've touched on a few times in the show, and that's injuries in pre-season. So I think things like that can have an effect on disposal and skill level, and certainly the capacity to play out the game. So, look, we're seeing terrible disposal from players who have been decent ball users in the past. So, the skill is there somewhere. How we can tap back into it and find it again is perhaps a bit more difficult.
I mean, we can't kick, we can't handball, we'll hit a target. Sometimes we handball to a guy who, we've got a guy who's in the clear and then he'll handball it, with this whole chaos ball, handball to a player who's got 3 guys on him. It's just ludicrous. We take a mark and play on. We don't wait that few seconds just to even see if there's someone in a better position. We just give it off straight away, and sometimes they're not in a better position.
Yeah, well, it's been noted in the post-match thread and elsewhere that the tempo that we seemed to have the week before disappeared this week, and it was back to full chaos ball. And certainly there were plenty of those kamikaze handball chains that ended in grief. As you say, missed targets, drop marks. The full gamut of disastrous disposal was on display at the weekend, as it's been for much of the year, unfortunately.
There were a few times as well where we would mark it within kicking distance of goal and they would give it off. And, all right, if you're going to do that, then you've got to hit the target. And the 3 or 4 times that happened, they don't hit the targets, and it's very, very frustrating as a supporter who, when a player marks it and they're well within kicking distance, and Tim Smith did it one time, and we know he can kick 40, 50 metres, and they give it off. It's very, very frustrating. I'm not a fan of the chaos game. Do you think that's going to change, or do you think Goody is he's stuck with it all year, doesn't seem to want to change it? Does it need to be changed? Do we need this?
Well, I mean, you're always refining your game style, and I don't believe in this sort of black and white. We've only got one game style, and that's it theory. And I think, there's a lot to be said for continuing with what got us through to a preliminary final last year, and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater just because the start of the season it hasn't gone according to plan. And if we've turfed this season already and we're looking ahead to 2020, then and a full list, then why wouldn't we be playing the same game plan that we played last year that brought us so much success? Yes, there are flaws in it, and it needs to be refined and perfected and better executed. But if the guts of it is there already, then you just need to build on it rather than throw it out completely.
What I'm very concerned about, and we've already touched on it, is how many players we have on our list that are terrible kicks. I think it's a huge issue for us, and it doesn't really have a clear fix because I don't think you can fix that type of thing. I think you're either a good kicker or you're not, and we've got too many that aren't good kicks.
Well, we've certainly got too many that aren't kicking well at the moment. I think that, as I say, with injury and perhaps loss of confidence as well, is probably affecting some players. But look, you have a guy like Christian Salem who's, just clean as a whistle. So, you can never have too much skill, can you?
He wasn't one of the people I was talking about. Most of those guys who were terrible kicks are actually, it's a huge problem because most of them are our starting midfield, and that's not good.
But look, someone like Clayton Oliver, his kicking hasn't been great this year, but I think it's better than what we've seen. And I know we've discussed Clary before. And the fact that his disposal is probably not up to the same standard that it was last year. He didn't kick a lot this year. He's kicking a bit more this year. But I think generally his kicking is better than what we're seeing at the moment. And I think that might be true of one or two other players too.
George on the outer in the chat room says, is there something wrong with James Harms that I may have noticed live? He was taken to the cleaners by Fife last week and by Zorko and Neil this week. Yeah, he has lost those contests, but I don't know. They're possibly, and it could go back to the whole short pre-season that some of these guys had, but he has been well beaten in those games. But I think it's a problem with most of our team. They're out of form.
And look, to be fair to James Harms, they are good players. Fife and Zorko and Neil all go all right. So, look, he took on some of the competition's better players towards the end of last year and beat them. He's lost these two.
You're not going to win them all, but
No.
He's in there to do a job. So,
look, he's struggling along with the rest of the midfield as a whole is struggling. Despite the odd performance here and there, we're getting beaten.
Delivery into the forward line once again was putrid. There were so many just high balls in, multiple guys, multiple players flying for a contest, no one on the deck. We don't have any exciting small forwards, and there's absolutely no pressure to keep the ball in once the ball hits the deck. Someone on Demonland today actually documented how many tackles from our forwards, 0 to Wiedemann, 0 to Petrarca, 1 to T-Mac, 1 to Hunt, 1 to Hannon, 1 to Smith. And they said total of 4 tackles, average of 1 per quarter in our forward line. Absolutely pathetic. No wonder every team just prances out of our attacking 50, and I can't agree more with that. Forward line pressure has been a real issue for us.
Yep, agree with that 100%.
No exciting forward. We really don't. I mean, that Jeff Farmer type player, the Aaron Davey type player, we don't have that. We had that in Jeffy Garlett a few years ago. We haven't been able to find, and it's not just a matter of sort of being able to trade that guy. Sometimes you just need to get a beauty just out of the draft or something, but we certainly don't have that at the moment.
No, there's potential for Jay Lockhart possibly there.
Jay doesn't really play in that sort of deep forward.
He's not a crummer, no.
And I'm happy with the role that he's playing up the ground as well. He's certainly not one of the guys that's having issues at the moment, yeah.
You're right, though. The pressure in the forward line is non-existent, and all season teams have waltzed it out of the back line without too much fuss at all.
D. Zephyr, what's he said in the chat room? Good, he said in his presser, our goals came from counter-attacking, and he was unhealthy to play that way to sustain all game. And he's asked if it seemed like that watching it live. I thought we would score. We did score quite a bit on the counter-attack, and we didn't really seem to be sort of creating anything in normal play. And just once again, this scoring shots, 32 to 19, the score definitely flattered us, even early on when we were sort of even. But then again, we were in a position where we were a few goals up, and then I think, was it T-Mac had dropped a sitter, could have put us further in front, and maybe that could have, even though they had most of the scoring shots, we could have got into a position where they could have had their heads drop, and then just before three-quarter time, it was the...
slammed on a few goals.
Yeah, and then it was the Hipwood show, which I think we can talk about next. Do you think the coach was a bit too slow in getting Petty off Hipwood?
Well, I think we're a bit... The matchups got thrown out with... was it McInerney going off?
Yeah.
Which then, look, it took too long, but I think that's the second week in a row, because Jesse went off the week before in the Fremantle game. So, we haven't been able to adjust to that, quickly enough. And one wonders whether the runner is or the lack of a runner is an issue there. Well, and it's interesting, just mentioning Jesse. So much of the criticism that was directed at him last year over a number of flaws in the forward line, and particularly his failure to put pressure on, and yet that problem is greater than it ever was last year when Jesse was around. So.
Yeah, I was Rod Grinter in our interview last week mentioned about the runners, and when someone goes off, if the runners can't get on in a sort of timely manner, he was sort of posing the question that, that's where a team can suffer in terms of getting the word out there of what to do with changes. It was suggested on Demonland, and I didn't see it. I couldn't see it on the day, so maybe people on TV might have seen it, that it was actually May's decision to get Petty off things. So. Yep. And then that sort of goes into my next point. I didn't really see it because it was obviously on TV, so I didn't notice the May versus Frost argument. Do we know any more about that? Has anything else been said about that argument?
No, look, Goody played it down. Sam Frost has played it down. Demonland has beaten it right up. I think a lot more's been made out of it than is necessary. I mean, remember Jack Viney and Tommy McDonald nearly came to blows at training a couple of pre-seasons ago, didn't they? So I don't have a problem with, players, being upfront and honest with each other, pulling each other into line. And if May's going to play that general's role in the back line, all well and good. He may have perhaps gone on too long. I actually didn't see it live either. I was watching the Fox feed, which is obviously different to the Channel 7 feed, and Fox go to a break during the three-quarter time. So anyway, I missed it until after. I don't really have a problem with it. It probably went on too long. I think the most interesting aspect of it was, it started as they were walking to the huddle and then continued in the huddle, and both Nathan Jones and Jack Viney sort of let it go and didn't involve themselves.
This is where I sort of had a problem, because I saw those optics of that later. I don't have a problem.
Clayton Oliver that sort of intervened.
Yeah, I have no problem with Maisie being the general and being that leader down back. We really need someone there. We spoke about it, with Jordan Lewis no longer being down there. It's great having May there, and he really looks like a leader down back. So you need someone who's going to take them under the wings. Look, as long as it's constructive and it's not demoralising. And we don't know. We weren't down in the huddle. We don't even know what was said between the two. So, but I'm happy for him to take that leadership role. What I didn't like seeing, and again, I wasn't there, so I can't hear but from what the vision I saw both Viney look over at one stage, and I saw Nathan Jones look over, and neither of them sort of got involved or took the step as a leader to maybe, that they have to pull them apart, but, and again, we're not there, we can't hear what's being said, so maybe they looked over and they thought nothing to it, but I don't know, maybe as the two leaders they might have stepped in, but again, we're not there, we can't hear what's being said.
And look, if you look at it, the bigger picture, Heath Shaw, screams at players 10 times a game, and has been doing it for years, and you don't see the skipper getting involved there. So as you say, Viney and Jones probably thought this is nothing and there's no need to involve ourselves. So it's a bit hard to assess when you can't lip read off the telly. So.
Yeah, look, I hope that's what it was. I hope it's a matter of, like, they knew, all right, Maisie's got it, he's a leader, he's marshalling his troops, so I hope that's the case. I hope it wasn't that they just
I think, look, it looked like Frosty was sort of saying, all right, I get it, mate, you've said it 10 times, and May might have said it an 11th or 12th time, so no biggie as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yep, that's fair enough. Look, Gawny going down. Were you holding your breath? Because they showed it on the scoreboard, but it was sort of hard to tell whether you could see sort of his ankle sort of moving under, but I wasn't sure whether there was any knee issues involved there. Were they sort of relaying any information on the TV? Because we didn't know what was happening, and he seemed to be in the rooms for a long time. So I had my sort of heart in my throat.
Yes. Well, to answer your initial question, I'm still holding my breath. Actually,
yes.
Although I think we've been told there's no serious damage, but he's only a maybe for this week. So
what's in Melbourne terms, no serious damage? He'll be back at the end of 2021.
Yes, and particularly when the injury's down in the lower half of the body there, ankle's very close to the foot, which is a real no-go zone for us. So, look, it was an important juncture in the game, unfortunately. There are a lot of other reasons as to why we lost, but
that's
Max going down was a factor in it. Absolutely.
And then when he came back on, you could see he wasn't his same self in terms of jumping at contests.
No,
and jumping in them
couldn't impact.
I'm just having a look over at my notes. I think we've pretty much covered most things that I've got in my notes. We certainly weren't helped in the last quarter free kick wise, but again, not a bearing on the result. It's very frustrating to be there. There were quite a number of, the thing that I hate about free kicks are those free kicks not given. I thought we were held at all the sort of contests, centre contests, we were being held and weren't getting any free kicks. But again, not a reason why we lost the game. But it's very frustrating interstate. I
find the standard of umpiring has really dropped this year, not just in Melbourne games, but the other games that I watch. And I think the standard of footy has also dropped with it. So I'm not enjoying footy too much as a spectacle this year, even separate of the Melbourne experience.
Do you think the 666 thing is one of the major culprits to it? Do you think that's
No, I'm not sure that's it.
Not enough. What could it be? What are you seeing as how's the football standard dropping?
I'm not sure. It just seems to me that the skill level across the competition seems to be quite poor. I mean, it's disastrous in our games, but I think there's been a drop across the comp as a whole.
The umpire, you mentioned the umpiring as well in non-Melbourne games. I watched the Thursday night game, the Essendon GWS, and I thought GWS were absolutely murdered by the umpires. And I'm not even talking about that goal at the end. There were quite a few decisions that non-marks paid. It's just excuse me. It's just poor umpiring across the board for most of the games. Bimman in the chat room says Oliver was held 3 or 4 times in the centre and that the umpires must hate him. But I'm sure Oliver is a bit lippy to umpires, and that could be why they don't like him. I think I'm done with most of my notes. One of the things that I had before we go on to other topics, it's just frustrating to see Brisbane the way they've come up this year. I mean, what were they? Were they bottom 2 last year? Bottom 4, certainly. I think or did they towards the end of the year win a few games in the back half? I can't remember where they finished, but they didn't start the year well last year, but so many teams have just waltzed past us in the development stakes. We've seen the Bulldogs and Richmond win premierships when a few years ago they were sort of down the bottom with us. St Kilda, although they've taken a step back. Brisbane now have absolutely waltzed past us, and I'm holding my breath about Carlton because I think they're going to waltz past us as well.
You've got to forget, Brisbane have been building a good list for a number of years, and it's still a young list, but they're the perfect example of why our season is so problematic and theirs seems to be going so well. And I think they've had 14 players who've played in every game this season, which is number 1 in the competition. Yep. And if you can have that kind of continuity with your core group of players, your list is going to, come close to achieving its potential in any given year.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, in contrast, we're compromised.
Yeah, not only that, you have a look at their injury list. I think there's 2 players on it, and I've never heard of the 2 players. So, and I think they're both listed as tests. So there's that. And you take out 8 of their best players, and I'm not saying 8 of our best are out, but you take out 8 of their 22. Sorry, look, perhaps they're not bottom 2. Or bottom 3 like we are, but they're definitely out of the 8, I would say. But fingers crossed for next year that we have a pretty consistent year in terms of players available. Because I'd love that. But all right.
BMAC1242 has asked in the chat room, if we lose to Carlton this week, will the pressure come from the media towards Goodwin? I don't think so. I think there'll be a bit of scrutiny if we do lose, but I think most in the media understand the circumstances of where we're at and the way that we have been compromised this year. So no, I don't. To answer the question, I don't think the pressure will come onto Goodwin, and it shouldn't.
Yeah, I think the pressure will come next year, this time next year or mid-year next year. If we have a pretty good run at it in terms of pre-season, in terms of players available, and we still can't sort of regain any form, and particularly if we're still languishing at the bottom of the ladder, then I think the media pressure will come at him, as it will have to come. I would expect there's got to be changes at the end of this year. I don't think we can just be content with the mid-season changes that we've made. I think there has to be some changes.
You mean coaching, coaching changes?
Coaching, I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some player turnover, and perhaps there'll be maybe a bigger name might get thrown on the trade table. I don't know. But I definitely think that's got to start in the coaching thing. A similar thing to what happened to Richmond just prior to their premiership season, where I think there was a bit of a change in the coaching personnel. So I mean, they didn't get rid of the senior coach, but I think they had some wholesale changes in the assistant department.
Yep.
And I think that might happen, but I think the pressure will come next year. That's my tip. And we'll, if we turn things around, there will be no pressure, obviously. Thread on Demonland this week. I'm just bringing it up now. We alluded to it earlier, that it's the pre-season, that we can blame what's happening entirely on our pre-season. I think the poster, Snoopy, made a pretty good case for that being the case. I might read a bit of it. In order to move past the knee-jerk reactions to this year's disappointments, it's time to acknowledge that the real reason probably started a few days after the loss to West Coast in the preliminary final last year, when something like 17 players were scheduled for end-of-season operations to fix ankles, shoulders, hips, knees, and heaven knows what else. This cruelled our pre-season, which most recognise is the foundation stone of strong on-field performances. Fitness is a non-negotiable in footy, and we just don't have it. It was reported here that he thinks it was Craig Jennings, I can't remember who said it, that at one stage in the pre-season we had 12 players fit enough to complete the main session, indicating that the injuries we had went well beyond those who had operations. Key players affected included our entire starting midfield, who had interrupted pre-season. Viney, Harms and Oliver had operations, and Jones and Brayshaw had injuries early in the pre-season. He says that if memory is correct, none started with the main group until February and some not until March. So that's got to have a huge effect. 3 of our best forwards had interrupted pre-seasons. T-Mac had both ankles operated on. Melksham had hammy issues, and Track had a knee operation. Our best defenders had interrupted pre-seasons. Jeddah with a knee. May had his issues. Lever recovering from an ACL. and from memory, Hibbert also had an operation. This is a list of the main crew who had little or no pre-season. Then there are players like Stretch, Hannon, Oscar Baker and Hoare who also had significantly disrupted pre-seasons. Through no fault of anyone, unless you want to suggest we send 13 of our preliminary final players off for end-of-season surgery in August. These players lack fitness because of the lack of a proper pre-season. He says that I think the lack of fitness underlies the majority of issues we have faced this year, including an ability to run out games, which is definitely a factor. I think some of our last quarters have been terrible. Inability to play 4 quarters. I don't think we've played a 4-quarter game this whole year. Basic skill.
Lucky to string 2 quarters together, really.
Some of it, it's only been 1 quarter or half a quarter. Basic skill errors. These occurs when players are fatigued. A lack of confidence, a lack of connection. Definitely the lack of connection. It's written all over this team. A lack of two-way running, and that's another thing. I had that in my notes. I forgot to bring that up. That's a big problem for us at the moment. He goes on to say, compounding this has been a wretched run of injury in the season. Vandenberg, Smith of the Joel variety, May, Melksham, Hibbard and Jeddah have been significant losses. I've got to agree, Melksham is a huge loss for us, particularly in that forward line in terms of connection.
Really hasn't played all season, basically.
No. Jay Kennedy Harris, who had a good game apparently in the twos. Stretch, Kolajasny and Garlett have added to our issues. Champion Data stats say we lost 89 games to injury to our best 22 in the first 10 games, 50% more than any other team. And this is on top of a poor pre-season. You can carry some injuries, but there reaches a stage when you lose so many that the game just falls apart because you're playing too many players who are not quite right. And that's written all over us. We've seen this with Richmond and Collingwood. Is it any surprise that Geelong and Brisbane are doing surprisingly well? They've had no injuries of note. And is it any surprise that Gawn and Salem have performed so well? To my knowledge, they had good pre-seasons. He just goes on with a few other points, but it's pretty much spot on. It makes
the thing
a
that
lot
I'd
of sense.
yeah, go on.
No, you go. I
was just going to say the thing I'd add to that is now that we're past the point of no return. I think we're also playing like a team that's deep down has given up on the season and knows that it's done and dusted. I'm not accusing the players of not trying. The effort is there 100%, but to be in this, you need to be playing at 110%, and that desperation and urgency and killer instinct, that we saw in abundance at the end of last year is missing at the moment. And I think that's because the players subconsciously know that the year's done. So really they're not playing for anything. I think that needs to be added into the equation too. But Snoopy has pretty much nailed it as far as I'm concerned. It's the foundation, if you like, for many of our problems this year. Not all of them, but many.
Well, Bin Man in the chat room makes a point that Snoop makes it clear later in the thread that's not entirely to blame, and it's definitely not. There are other problems there, but look, we'll see what happens next year if they do get a good pre-season at it, and then we've still got the issues, then I think we need to reassess. But you know what? I think that's a good starting off point. But there are other issues that they sort of can't be ignored, and I hope they will look at everything. And I wouldn't mind if there are any players that are not quite right. I'm happy for them to go now that the season's done and dusted. Obviously, last year we weren't going to send our best, our midfield off to surgeries in August. But perhaps if there are any guys that aren't quite right, I wouldn't be playing them. I'd send them off to surgery, and not in a tanking way, but let's get things right for next year.
But look, by the same token, I agree with that, but by the same token, I'm sure the FD will want to play as many games as they can with, the team that they see as being sort of core going forward in the back end of the year as we get ready for next year too. So it's sort of like match practice every week in a way.
Not if there are players who are not quite right. We don't have a good history of managing players with injuries, and I don't know if there are any players that are playing with injuries. But do we need a rebuild? Is a rebuild on the cards, or do we refer back
rebuild.
to the? There are some people who I'm not surprised actually when I see the names of the people asking for rebuilds, but there are people that think we need an entire
It's the same
rebuild.
people that start the sack X threads post match too. So the usual suspects, yes. George on the out has asked in the chat room, would it be nice for the president or CEO to come out and say exactly what Snoop has highlighted? And it's a fair point. It did come out at some point, that reference to the preseason and the presentation made to the board that 3/4 of the squad was missing basically. So I'm not sure who it was that revealed that information to the media, which is where sort of the basis of Snoop's post there. But message.
Is that message for the supporters, or is that message? Maybe I'm asking George this question. Is that message to highlight for the supporters, or to highlight for the wider AFL community?
I think it's both. And look, it's important. The club needs to communicate with its members, who are, its stakeholders in a way. And I think you could make a case that they're pretty absent at the moment in what's been a really difficult season. We've got a young coach and a young list, and so I think it'd be, on the whole, it'd probably good to have some of that support coming from behind.
Because Goody's been quite adamant all year that he's not blaming things on injuries. I don't know if he's just trying to get us to read between the lines when he says that, but he's been not wanting to blame injuries for anything, or I don't know if he's even referred to the preseason and the lack of preparation.
He's made very little reference to it. And look, people accuse Goodwin of being boring in press conferences, and he should be more honest, and he should be this, and he should be more that. If I was working in PR and comms at the Melbourne Football Club, I would be hoping that Simon Goodwin doesn't spend more than 5 seconds thinking about what he is going to say or should say to the media. I mean, the guy's there to coach. If you're looking to your coach for communication skills and PR skills, you got the wrong caper.
Who is it that should be coming out? Is it the president? Is it the CEO? I mean, I've heard very little from Pert this year at all. You wouldn't even know he was there at times. I think we heard from him in the preseason at the Collingwood practice match, but I haven't really seen much of him throughout the year.
No, but I think the other thing here is perhaps there's really been no call on the CEO and the president, because we're not in crisis. So the media is not at our door, hungry for a story. So perhaps they're staying silent to avoid creating, the appearance that we're in crisis. If you look at the ladder, we are, but supporters that have an understanding of the circumstances of where we're at, can sort of see the bigger picture, and perhaps the clubs trying to hold true to that. In answer to your question, George on the outer says it's for the supporters primarily. There's been nothing at the moment. Look, I think it's not a bad idea to give Goodwin a bit of support, probably.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. I guess we'll move on. I didn't. I've been away. I didn't see any of the Casey game. The only thing of note that I really saw two things of note: Jake and Harris kicking 3 goals, and Prusy having a massive 64 plus hitouts. And I think it's fair to say that we'll probably see Prusy play this week. It looks like, they're saying there's no serious damage to Max's leg, but there's obviously his ankle, but there's obviously a lot of swelling, and he could play. I would say give him a rest. So I guess we will see Prusy. I would have liked to have seen him come in I think had Max not been injured, I think we might have seen him come in anyway, and I would have liked to have seen the two of them play together, because we've been I've been wanting to see how it works with the two of them in the team, but it looks like we'll see Bruce go solo, which probably isn't the best way to probably see him play.
Have you prepared the server for what's going to happen if Max is out and Bruce doesn't come in?
Oh, there is. I don't think there's any extra, whatever Nasher could give. There's no extra.
No extra internet.
The internet's not big enough to handle that. Is probably the most layman's way to describe that. I can't see if he's not in, because I think one of the issues when Max went down, I think George mentioned it in his report of the game, was that when Max went down, we obviously were playing with ruckman, with forwards as ruckman, and to the point where at the beginning of the fourth quarter, we had, I can't remember, I think Sam Wiedemann was in the ruck, Tom McDonald was on the wing, and Tim Smith was our only big forward in the forward line, and the game was still there to be won. It wasn't over yet. Even though they got the ascendancy late in the third quarter, but we still, technically we're still in with a chance, but we had no forward line. We've been screaming for a proper ruck for a while to sort of be in there to relieve Max, but if he's not picked, then I don't know.
But look, to be fair, we've talked about form and fitness particularly, and the knock on Bruce. Most of the year has been that he's struggled. Bruce, has been that he's struggled in the second half of Casey games to run them out. So I think that's really been the issue.
And look, no one was suggesting this week, because I think Tim Smith had a good game last week. Tom McDonald finished the game very strongly, kicked 3 goals, so they weren't going to drop any of those guys. And well, maybe we can talk about this, because this sort of came out after our podcast last week, was in terms of Wiedemann and the comments Goodwin made about Wiedemann, and it was the best 6-possession game. What did you think? What did you think of that comment? I know that people have come to his defence, Goodwin's defence, in saying that Wiedemann gets to contests and he gets the ball to the ground and all that, but it's quite a strange thing to sort of, and there was quite a bit on Demonland during the week about that. There's quite heated arguments about that. What are your thoughts?
I think people got banned over that discussion, actually, so it was a heated argument, but it reminds me of a infamous Carlton player, Robert Klomp, who got awarded the television for best on the ground in one of the night series games back in the early 80s, when he only had 8 possessions, and it's gone down in history as sort of the greatest 8-possession game. So Sam got 2 less touches and obviously played just as well as Robert Klomp did that night. But I think that was totally overblown as well. And again, people read so much into what the coach says, and I don't think he was doing anything other than giving a young player a bit of a boost in the press, in the chance that the player happens to read and sees the comments. The whole team's struggling at the moment, not just Sam. But, the coach is going to go criticising players that have played 15 or 20 games in the media either.
BMAC in the BMAC 1242 in the chat room has asked, is Jordan Lewis likely to come back in this year? I don't think he will. I think, he's obviously not in... he's not in the thoughts and preparations for 2020, so I don't think he'll come back unless there's the need in terms of injuries. Can you see him coming back in the team at any time this year, if providing that we sort of have a fit back line?
You wouldn't really just give him a farewell game, would you?
It's not really Goodwin's style, I don't think, to sort of do that. I can't see it. I mean, he had 36 touches before this week's game, in the last week's Casey game, and he didn't get in. Look,
people are saying there are worse players you could throw into the midfield than a Jordan Lewis. So he definitely, there's definitely a case to be made for him to play in the ones again, for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't. If he gets a game, I'd be happy with that. But look, he's probably not in their plans for next year. So I'm thinking he might not get a game. But
yep.
Just as I go over the injury list, I'm not sure they updated the injury list, so we don't know what's happening with Max. He'll obviously, I don't think he'll play this week. I think he'll obviously have a test, but yeah, they're saying Neville Jetta test as well. I'm not sure. Do you think they'd play him in the twos or before he gets a game? I don't know. Melksham.
Nev?
Yep.
Nev's been out long enough that I think he'd need the run, wouldn't he?
Possibility Lever comes back this week. If he does, you would think maybe Petty might make way for him. I don't think there's anyone else that's knocking on the... So there's Jay Kennedy-Harris, kicked 3 goals, so there's a possibility someone comes out for him. Maybe Hannon. I think Hannon... It's been quite disappointing since he's come back in the team. I know
you have him as a lock in the 22.
I had him as a lock in the 22. He hasn't been performing. I had Hannon as a lock in the 22.
Yeah, I'm not convinced yet.
Last year I thought he was strong at the end of the year, but he was a lock. He's not a lock. I think he came back in the team out of necessity because we had so many players out and we just were bringing players back in, which is part of the problem. We were bringing back players as soon as they were sort of past the fitness test. They were getting straight back in, and I think Hannon needed to find some touch, and he in the twos, they brought him back in and he hasn't been able to find the touch in the ones. So I'd probably send him back to find some touch. And look, Jay Kennedy-Harris, it's his last roll of the dice, really. So I'd bring him in either for Hannon or Nibbler, because Nibbler's also struggling in the ones, sort of running around, not doing much. So give his last roll of dice. He's sort of playing for his career. I'd give him a go after kicking 3 goals, and we'll see what happens this week. And I guess Brucey is the other one. If Max isn't, even if Max does come up, maybe put Brucey in as well.
Yeah, I think Max will miss. I'm like you.
Yeah. I think you have to if that ankle's swollen and he can't run and can't jump.
And the way he described it, it sounded pretty nasty. Although it's obviously just bruising or a strain of some sort, but strain or sprain, I suppose. But reading between the lines, it sounded like no to me.
Carlton have a few injuries at the moment as well. I noticed. We're talking about it before the show starts. We don't know about Cripps. Cripps is listed as a test, knowing our luck he comes straight back in and plays his usual best. Charlie Curnow, I mean, that's a big out for them. And I also see that Harry McKay is out as well. He's got a groin and he's listed as a week. So that's
so you're saying we're a chance?
Well, you know what? Well, you look at those couple of injuries and you give us a chance, but I don't know. The way we've been playing, I don't think we can beat Carlton. And that kills me to say that.
It's funny, though. I mean, the game on the weekend was sort of symptomatic of the whole season, and that we mostly played terrible footy, but we were still in it.
We were
We were still in it quite late in the game.
In the third quarter.
And yet then we still lost by quite a decent margin. 5 goals is, is a bit of a clip around the ears. So it's sort of been like that all year where we've been in it, but terrible, and kind of had our backsides handed to us in the final wash-up.
Yeah, when we were in the third quarter, when we were up by 2 goals, and we sort of had a couple of chances. I think we fluffed a few chances. T-Mac dropped a sitter of a mark, like a hot potato, and also the ball was kicked over to Petrarca, or handballed over to him, and it just sort of, he couldn't pick it up, or bounced funny, or whatever happened. We really could have sort of made something of nothing, and sort of they might not have got the roll on that they got, because once they sort of started kicking a goal, the crowd sort of got involved. It was very loud there, and then they couldn't miss goals. They were kicking them from everywhere, so yeah, it certainly didn't help.
And just on that point, D. Zephyr asks in the chat room if McGovern is their main man this week, or is Casbolt going to pull out a game for the ages?
Well, Casbolt,
in terms of kicking accuracy, it's got to be Casbolt, because he's a disaster in front of goals. He'll probably kick 6 straight this week.
Well, he's been playing. I didn't see their game this week, but he's been playing in defence all year. So, and I think with our forwards, big guys, he's probably got a man, a Wiedemann, or a T-Mac, or even a Bruce. But yeah, McGovern's probably their main man in the forward line this week. But I'm not actually worried too much about our back line. I don't see our back line being our problem. I think our problem is forward line, and our delivery into the forward line in particular, and the structures, and the fact that there's no forward pressure. I think that's where our problem lies at the moment. And obviously we'd like to get back a few of the guys like Melksham and perhaps Jetta back into the team, Lever.
Sides find it very easy to score against us from turnovers.
Yeah.
It seems that all of our turnovers result in goals really quickly.
Yeah.
I know I'm exaggerating, but that's just kind of the impression I've had over the year.
That was happening last year as well. But we were scoring so heavily that it sort of didn't.
It was masked.
Yeah, it was absolutely masked. So, yep. I think, yep. I don't think we're going to be able to solve that one on this podcast. I think that's all for us tonight. I've got different equipment here, so here we go with some music to take out the show. Grapeviney, thank you once again for joining me on the podcast, and hopefully next week's show is a little bit more upbeat, and going into the rest of the year as well. Obviously we're going to play out the year and play out these podcasts for the rest of the year. But thank you, Grapeviney, for joining me on this somber occasion.
Go D's.
Go D's. All right, we'll be back next week, same time, same channel. Go D's.